Hello and welcome to Cleveland Classic Cinema. Tonight's movie is 1953's Mesa of Lost Women, directed by Ron Ormond and Herbert Tavos. Oh boy. Mesa of Lost Women. The horrors of the beast of Yucca Flats and the creeping terror pale in comparison. This movie is so awful, I truly don't know where to start. I suppose we can start on a subject we're conversant with and see where things go from there. There was a rumor going around for years that this movie was written and directed by Edward D. Wood, Jr., but that's nonsense. Anyone familiar with the work of Ed Wood would know from the beginning of the movie that he had nothing to do with it. The only connection between this movie and Ed Wood is the music. Regular viewers will recall my mentioning during the intro to Jailbait that the score was lifted from tonight's film. The movie started out as a giant bug film to be called Tarantula, directed by Herbert Tavos. The movie was never completed, and Howco, the production company, ended up with a lot of unusable footage that they brought to director Ron Ormond. Ron Ormond was born Vic Nero on August 29, 1910 in Baldwin, Louisiana. He was a fascinating guy who started his career as Ron Ormond, a stage musician in vaudeville. He took the professional name Ormond in tribute to his mentor, magician Ormond McGill. He met his future wife, June Carr, during an engagement at the Capitol Theater in Portland, Oregon in 1938. After they married, they toured together all over the country, having a son, Tim, in 1950. Ron's close friend, Bela Lugosi, stood as godfather to Tim when he was baptized. While touring with former hairdresser-turned-bullwhip master Lash LaRue, Ormond hooked up with Joy Houck Sr. and Francis White, owners of Howco Productions. He offered them a script tailored for LaRue, and they approved it for production. From 1948 to 1956, Ormond directed and/or produced and wrote over 30 features for the company, earning a reputation among tight-fisted producers for being able to bring films in on time and on budget, and this served him well as it kept him working steadily. June worked close by her husband as producer, set decorator, costume designer, script and continuity supervisor, and also organized personal appearance tours of the country with the stars of the films her husband cranked out. She organized a tour with the Three Stooges that was a huge success. She remembered the Broom Brothers furnished the music and Chris Randall did a rope dance. Then out came the Stooges and did a hilarious act. They had people rolling in the aisles. Some of these people had never even dreamed of meeting and seeing the Stooges perform. In Lynchburg, Virginia, they did 5 shows a day, and each show was a packed house. After each show, the Stooges would pose with fans for pictures, after which the fans would be handed a card they could use to redeem for a photo, which cost $1 through mail order. June recalled that they took 500 to 1,000 pictures after the shows, and almost every one of the cards was redeemed. Later, Ormond filmed his old vaudeville friends performing for a series of ultra-low-budget films such as 1950's Hollywood Varieties, the minstrel showcase Yes Sir, Mr. Bones, and Varieties on Parade, both 1951. They were shot on 2-day schedules with an extra day for pickups and to film the intro. By this time, Ron and June had made a good number of contacts in the Hollywood community, and a lot of stage and screen performers such as Lugosi, Jackie Coogan, and Lyle Talbot would hang out at their house playing marathon gin rummy games. When Ron was saddled with making something out of the tarantula footage, he asked Coogan for help, and the actor agreed as a favor to his friend. They slapped together the mess you're about to see, and June, who was a whiz at figuring out promotions, came up with a line, "Have you ever been kissed by a woman like this?" for the ad campaign. The Ormonds then did a number of other cut-and-paste pictures, such as Attack of the Flying Saucers, a movie about palm reading of all things called The Eternal Question, and another mess called Untamed Mistress, which was made from parts of a short he made for Howco with Sabu the Jungle Boy, actual jungle footage, and new segments about a girl raised by gorillas. The press book for the film leered, "Who will be her mate, man or beast?" His next movie was an exploitation film about a frigid housewife called Please Don't Touch Me, which they took out on the roadshow circuit along with Untamed Mistress, playing drive-ins across the country. June took a page from her former employer, Kroger Babb, and marketed personal hygiene books at the showings. During the intermission, a 3-minute taped recording pushing the books would play and then instruct everyone who wanted to buy a copy to flash their high beams. The entire drive-in would light up as bright as day. June remembered we made up to $1,000 a night on the books alone. Orman had a strong spiritual side to his personality, and after going surgery for bladder cancer in 1959, embarked on an 8-month journey to the Far East where he studied mysticism and religion, later publishing a book called Into the Strange Unknown. He also used footage shot during the trip in his movies Please Don't Touch Me and the posthumously completed The Sacred Symbol. In the 1950s, Orman pioneered television, producing a weekly roller derby show, and several years after the success of Robert Mitchum's feature Thunder Road, produced the first in a series of what were referred to as white trash movies, the first being 1965's White Lightning Road. The family then moved to Nashville since working in Hollywood was killing Ron and production facilities were available there through Trafco, the production arm of the United Methodist Church. He and June made fast friends with the stars of the Grand Ole Opry and produced 40 Acre Feud in 1965 with Minnie Pearl, George Jones, Loretta Lynn, Ray Price, Skeeter Davis, Della Reeves, Roy Drewski, and Bill Anderson. The film was a huge hit in rural southern drive-ins, so the Ormans decided that mixing the ideas in White Lightning Road and 40 Acre Feud might be a good idea, and created The Girl from Tobacco Road. This movie had every exploitable element a film like this possibly could. Country music, chain gangs, violence, hidden loot, a Bible-thumping preacher with a hero-worshipping son and 2 nubile daughters, one good and one bad, who was described in the press book as a girl wilder than a peach orchard hog, a vivacious and voluptuous creature whose purpose in life is man, any man, and heavenly salvation at the end. In 1967, Ron, June, and Tim were flying to an opening of The Girl from Tobacco Road when the small plane they owned crashed in a cow field. Tim was unhurt, but Ron and June were seriously injured and were in the hospital for 6 weeks. Tim remembered, after an airplane accident, in fact, anytime you come close to death, you are forced to look at your life differently. Ron's spiritual side stepped up front and center, but he still had one exploitation film left in him. 1968's Monster and the Stripper, starring Tim Ormond and rockabilly singer Sleepy LaBeef. A second forced landing in an airplane strengthened Ron's resolve, and he became a born-again Christian, hooking up with a fire and brimstone Southern Baptist preacher named Estes Perkle. Perkle was intrigued by Ormond and hankered to make a movie to spread the word of God. He hit his parishioners up for funding, promising them parts in the film, and the end result was very different than Perkle had imagined. 1971's If Footmen Tire You, What Will Horses Do? Was an incredible exploitation film that shows what would happen if the godless communists took over the USA. 1984's Red Dawn lifts a number of elements used in this movie, such as the re-education camp, where elderly prisoners are forced to sit on wooden folding chairs and listen to a recording repeating, "Communism is good. Christianity is stupid," in addition to raping, beheading, and torture. Referred to as soul winners, these films were really just exploitation films wrapped in religious ideologies. This was followed in 1974 by The Burning Hell, a movie where the main character, played by Tim Ormond, witnesses his best friend get decapitated in an accident right after denouncing Jesus. He asks Reverend Perkle if his friend is going to hell, and the kind preacher tells him, yes, his friend is probably burning in hell right this minute. The Ormans had a falling out with Perkle after this film since he kept all the profits. Hey, what a shock, huh? They were then contacted by John R. Rice, a fundamentalist minister and publisher who invited Ron and Tim to accompany him on a tour of the Holy Land. They shot footage of the trip and fashioned it into a film called The Land Where Jesus Walked. Pleased with the result, Rice introduced Ron to Jack Van Impe and Jerry Falwell, who starred in the next epic, 1976's The Grim Reaper. Ron spent the next 10 years working on religious films, averaging 1 film per year. Ron Ormond died of cancer on May 11, 1981 in Nashville, Tennessee. My source for this information was an excellent article written by David D. Duncan and Jim Ridley for Psychotronic magazine a great periodical published by Cleveland's own Michael Weldon, and available, as is every other magazine you could ever want, at Bank News on 41st and Clark. Speaking of availability, if you'd like to see some of my past intros and read articles on whatever happens to be floating around in my head at any given moment, in addition to things that are actually interesting, hop on the net and go to www.whetstonemedia.com, a website run by my friend Rick Bender that features news, business, entertainment, and a host of other interesting subjects. John Leslie Coogan, Jr. was born on October 26, 1914 in Los Angeles, California. Born into a show business family, he appeared in more than 130 movies and television shows in his career. His father, Jack Coogan Sr., was a dancer in vaudeville, and his mother had been a child star. He first appeared on stage at the age of 4, and by the age of 5 was touring with his family. Charlie Chaplin saw young Jackie on stage and, taken with the boy, then and there concocted a movie to star himself in Jackie. He tested the youngster with a small part in 1919's A Day's Pleasure, and then began production on 1921's The Kid, the movie that made Jackie Coogan a star. The Kid is a really amazing movie and is a perfect example of the genius of not only Chaplin, but little Jackie Coogan. It's funny, clever, heartbreaking, and joyous all at once, and should be seen by everyone. It hasn't lost one bit of its amazing appeal, despite being nearly 100 years old. By 1923, Coogan was earning $1 million a year. At the time he reached the age of 13, his career was pretty much on the wane. He'd grown up on screen, and his popularity ended with 1930's Tom Sawyer and 1931's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. In 1935, he was in a car being driven by his father with his best friend, Junior Durkin, when the car crashed in the mountains. Jack Sr. and Durkin were killed in the accident, and Jackie wound up in the hospital. His mother married Jackie's business manager, and when he came of age, he tried to lay claim to the $4 million he had earned in his acting career, but his mother and stepfather refused to turn it over to him. He sued for the money that belonged to him, but under California law, he wasn't entitled to it, and he was eventually awarded a measly $126,000 in 1939. Due to the public uproar, a law referred to as a Child Actor Bill, properly referred to as the Coogan Act, was created that set up a trust fund to protect the earnings of child actors. He appeared in a number of films and supporting roles, marrying Betty Grable in 1939. The marriage only lasted 3 years. He served in the Army during World War II, and upon his return to Hollywood, found he was unable to get his career started again. He found work in B movies, usually in bit parts or playing a heavy, such as Mr. A, the drug dealer in 1958's High School Confidential. He found fairly steady work in television, and then in 1964, 50 years old and nearly broke, he landed the part that again made him a star, Uncle Fester in The Addams Family. He never lacked for work again. In 1972, Charlie Chaplin returned to the United States after 20 years of exile to receive the Handel Medallion in New York and a Lifetime Achievement Award in Hollywood. And Coogan was at the airport along with a good number of other luminaries to greet him. Chaplin deplaned and moved along the line, exchanging casual handshakes with those present. But when he got to Coogan, whom he hadn't seen in decades but recognized instantly, embraced him warmly and said, "You know, I think I would rather see you than anybody else." Jackie Coogan died of a heart attack on March 1st, 1984 in Santa Monica, California. Fans of another Cleveland classic cinema fave, Robot Monster, will be interested to know that the guy who plays George, the male nurse, is none other than Roman himself, George Barrows. There are some rather attractive, exotic-looking women wearing mops on their heads in this film, and it also features Ed Wood's former flame, Dolores Fuller, as one of the Spider-Women. That's about as far as the worth of this movie stretches. One thing you can count on with a story like this is that if you hear a narrator spouting a bunch of nonsensical gibberish over scenes that were shot without sound, you're in for a painful experience. There are any number of movies that bear this out. The aforementioned The Creeping Terror and The Beast of Yucca Flats, not to mention Glen or Glenda, Monster a Go-Go, King Dinosaur, The Oscar. The end is listless, as they say. Odds are pretty good that if there's a through the film narrator, either the soundtrack was lost or so badly recorded that it was incoherent. The movie was simply shot MOS with the intention of either dubbing it in post or the money ran out, or, as in this case, The movie just bit to begin with, and the poor guy saddled with directing was trying to make it coherent. That doesn't make up for the suckiness of the film, of course, but know that I do take these things into account. So right now, sit back, relax, and enjoy Mesa of Lost Women, right here on Cleveland Classic Cinema.